The email arrived at 7:43 in the morning, and I almost missed it between a spam coupon for oil changes and a newsletter I'd been meaning to unsubscribe from for 2 years. The subject line read, "Congratulations." I opened it at the kitchen table with my coffee still too hot to drink, and the first sentence said what I'd been waiting 14 years to read. "Your loan has been paid in full." I set the mug down. The screen glowed against the tile floor I'd installed myself 6 summers ago. The grout lines slightly crooked near the pantry where I'd run out of spaces and used folded cardboard instead. Sunlight came through the window I'd replaced last spring, the one that used to rattle every time a truck passed on the road. Birds were going back and forth in the live oak outside, the same tree I'd almost cut down my first year because the roots were cracking the driveway, until a neighbor told me it was probably 70 years old and worth more than the house. The house was quiet. That was the thing about paying off a mortgage alone. When it was done, there was nobody to high-five. I pushed my reading glasses up and read the email again. Paid in full. 14 years of extra payments. Rounded up to the nearest 100. Sometimes the nearest 200, when the overtime checks came through. 14 years of saying no to vacations, no to the new car, no to the kitchen remodel I'd actually wanted instead of the one I could afford with leftover tile from a Habitat restore in Katy. I got up and walked to the hallway closet. The file boxes were stacked by year, labeled in my handwriting. The early ones in the cheap markers that bled through the cardboard. I pulled down the box labeled with the year I bought the house. Inside, the original closing documents sat in a manila folder with the title company's logo in the corner. I opened it and ran my thumb across my signature on the last page. The ink had smeared. The pen was a freebie from the title company's desk, one of those thin ones with the cap that never stays on. I was 19. The clerk had asked if my parents were on their way. I told her they were running late. They were not running late. They were not coming at all. Above the file boxes, on the top shelf, a shoebox sat behind the folders. Old. Duct tape across the lid. Yellowed and curling at the edges. My eyes stayed on it for a second longer than they should have, and then I closed the closet door. I picked up my phone from the kitchen table, scrolled past the texts, past the work emails, past the group chat from the IT team arguing about whether Thursday's happy hour should be at the brewery or the taco place. There it was. In saved voicemails. One file. 14 years old. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the kitchen. Younger than he sounded now, but carrying the same weight. The same flatness he used when he'd already made up his mind. Buying that dump is the dumbest thing you'll ever do. Don't come crying to us when you can't make the payments. The voicemail lasted 11 seconds. I'd listen to it once a year. Every year. On the anniversary of closing day. A ritual. The coffee maker hissed behind me, and the birds kept going in the live oak, and Phil Novak's voice hung in the air of the kitchen he'd never helped me build. And I let it sit there until the silence took it back. I opened Zillow on my phone and typed my address. The estimate loaded in 2 seconds. $370,000. I'd bought it for $85,000. With a down payment scraped together from 6 years of clearing plates at a diner in Katy. One small smile, just for myself, lasting exactly the length of time it took to sip the coffee that had finally cooled to the right temperature. Then the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. A Saturday morning in Cyprus, the neighborhood still quiet, most people sleeping in or already at the gym. I opened the Ring app on my phone, and the camera showed me the driveway. Whitney's white SUV, parked crooked. The back hatch already open, my father's truck behind it, the same Ford he'd been driving since I was in high school. My mother climbing out of the passenger side, pulling her purse strap over her shoulder, and Whitney, standing at the trunk, pulling out suitcases, 6 of them. Matching, monogrammed with a cursive G for Greer. I opened the front door. Whitney was already on the porch with 2 suitcases in her hands, one in each. The wheels still spinning from the driveway. She pushed past me before I finished saying her name. The wheels hit the hardwood with a sound like drumsticks on a snare, and her perfume filled the hallway, something floral and expensive that I'd smelled on her at every family event for the past 5 years. Behind her, Addison and Bryce came running. Addison was 8 and already taller than I expected, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Bryce was 5 and wearing rain boots even though the sky was clear. They slipped past my legs without looking up. Whitney walked straight to the master bedroom, my bedroom. She opened the door, stepped inside, and turned around to face the hallway. Addison, you and Bryce are taking the big guest room. Help your brother pick a side. She said it the way someone says pass the salt. Already decided. Already done. Phil and Barb came through the front door behind the kids. Barb hugged me. She smelled like the lavender lotion she'd used my entire life. And her arms were tight and brief. The kind of hug that says, I love you, but please don't make this difficult. Phil looked around the living room. His eyes moved across the built-in shelves I'd installed 2 years ago. The ones I'd designed on graph paper and cut on a table saw I borrowed from a coworker. He nodded at them, but said nothing about them. Whitney and Todd lost the house, Barb said. She set her purse on my counter, like she was setting down a verdict. The bankruptcy finalized last week. The kids need stability, and you've got all this space. Mum, nobody called me. We're calling you now. Phil's voice. The same flatness from the voicemail, 14 years later. This is what family does. Caitlin, this is my house, and she's your sister. Whitney emerged from the master bedroom. She was already holding her phone, texting, her acrylic nails tapping the screen in quick bursts. The closet is huge, she said to no one in particular. I can fit everything. She was texting Todd. Logistics. Telling him the master bedroom was secured. The closet was big enough. The kids had a room, all of it happening in real time. While I stood in my own hallway holding a coffee mug and watching my family move into the house I'd spent 14 years paying for, the same house my father once called a dump and my sister once called cute. Kind of small, though. I stood in the kitchen while Whitney unpacked toiletries in my bathroom. I could hear the zip of her cosmetics bag, the clink of bottles being set on the counter. I'd retired after a pipe leak in year 4. Addison ran past with a stuffed elephant, heading for the guest room. Bryce found the pantry and opened it with both hands. Do you have fruit snacks? I did not have fruit snacks. Phil sat down at the kitchen table. My chair. The laptop was still open to the mortgage payoff email. The screen angled toward him. The word, congratulations, visible in bold at the top of the message. He did not look at it. He picked up the remote from the side table and turned on the television in the living room, and within 30 seconds, he'd found a college football pre-game show and settled in like he'd been sitting in that chair for years. Barb opened my refrigerator. She leaned in and scanned the shelves the way she scanned everything, quick and judgmental, looking for what was available and what was missing. We'll need to do a grocery run if we're doing lunch here, she said. Whitney, can we talk? Whitney appeared in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe. Sure, what's up? You can't just move in. This is my house. I need you to find somewhere else. Whitney's face shifted. The bright, performative cheer she wore like a second set of clothes thinned out. And underneath it was something harder. Kate, my kids don't have a bedroom right now. Bryce has been sleeping on Mom's couch for 2 weeks. You have 2 empty bedrooms. I'm not asking for your whole life. I'm asking for a roof. Barb. From behind me. Caitlin, your sister is going through the hardest time of her life. You could show a little grace. Phil, from the recliner, without turning around. We helped you get this house. Don't forget that. I turned to face him. You didn't pay a single dollar. We co-signed. That counts for something. You didn't co-sign. I qualified alone. Phil paused. His jaw moved the way it moved when he was sorting through what to say and what to leave out. He did not remember the details of something that happened 14 years ago, But he remembered the story he'd been telling at church, at cookouts, at Thanksgiving dinners whenever someone asked about me and the house. That he'd helped, that he'd gotten me started, that his daughter's little real estate investment was possible because of his support. The story had been a lie for 14 years. He'd told it so many times that the edges between what happened and what he said happened had worn smooth. I went quiet. This was my pattern, and every person in that house counted on it. Whitney had built her entire plan around it. I shut down, absorbed the hit, and accommodated whatever came next. Every holiday, every birthday, every phone call that ended with Barb saying that's just how Whitney is and me saying I know, Mum, and hanging up and standing in the kitchen of the house I'd paid for alone, holding the phone and staring at the wall and saying nothing to anyone. But this morning, before the doorbell rang, I had listened to a voicemail, and then I had opened Zillow and seen a number that made 14 years of sacrifice mean something more than survival. I picked up my phone. I walked to the back porch and closed the door behind me. The yard I'd mowed last Saturday stretched out in clean lines. The fence I'd stained 2 summers ago had weathered to a warm brown that caught the morning light. A cardinal sat on the top rail and watched me with the kind of calm that comes from having no opinion about anything. I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in months. Lena Odom, attorney at law. She'd been a client at my IT firm 3 years ago, a real estate lawyer who ran her own practice out of an office near the courthouse. We'd talked over coffee once after a project wrapped, and she'd told me something I'd carried with me ever since. The people who love you will never ask you to shrink. My thumb hovered over the green button. Inside, through the glass door, I could see Phil in my chair, Barb at my counter, Whitney's suitcases lined up in my hallway like soldiers waiting for orders. And somewhere in the guest room, Addison was arranging stuffed animals on a bed that did not belong to her, in a house that did not belong to her mother, on a Saturday morning that was supposed to be mine. I pressed call. Lena picked up on the second ring. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been awake for a while, probably at her desk already, even on a Saturday. The kind of person who answered the phone the same way at 7 in the morning and 7 at night. Lena. It's Caitlin Novak. From the Harmon Tech Project. Caitlin. Of course. What's going on? I told her. Short sentences. Facts only. The way I'd lay out a project timeline at work. My sister showed up with 6 suitcases. She's in my master bedroom. My parents are here. They say they helped me buy the house. They didn't. My father claims he co-signed the mortgage. He didn't co-sign. I paid it off this morning. Every dollar. By myself. And now my sister is unpacking toiletries in my bathroom, and my mother is making sandwiches in my kitchen. Lena listened without interrupting. When I finished, the pause was long enough that I could hear a pen tapping against something hard on her end of the line. Is your name the only name on the deed? Yes. Is your name the only name on the mortgage? There is no mortgage. I paid it off this morning. The tapping stopped. Caitlin, you own that house free and clear. Under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05, if you give oral notice that entry is forbidden and they remain on your property, that is criminal trespass. Class B, misdemeanor. Up to 180 days in county jail and a $2,000 fine. She has her kids with her. That's her problem to solve. She had 2 weeks on your mother's couch. And in those 2 weeks, she didn't call a shelter, didn't look for an apartment, didn't pick up the phone and ask you. She showed up with matching suitcases and picked your bedroom. That's a choice, Caitlin. She made it. My dad says he co-signed. Did he? He didn't. Then he's either lying or he's forgotten. Either way, his name is not on your deed. Pull up your county appraisal district record right now. Harris County. Read me the owner name. I opened the browser on my phone, typed in the Harris County Appraisal District address, and searched my property. The page loaded, and under owner there was one name. Mine. Caitlin Marie Novak, I read. And nobody else. And nobody else. Lena's voice changed. The legal precision softened into something closer. Something that sounded less like an attorney and more like a woman who had been through her own version of this. I let my ex-husband's family walk through my front door for 3 years because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I kept the peace. I made the coffee. I smiled when his mother rearranged my kitchen cabinets. By the time I finally said no, they'd changed the locks on my own house and told the neighbors I'd abandoned it. She paused. Don't let them settle in. I thanked her and hung up. The cardinal was still on the fence. The yard was still mine. The law was on my side, and I was still standing on my own back porch, unable to walk inside and say the words. I stayed outside for another 40 minutes, sitting on the porch step with my phone in my lap, listening to the house through the screen door. Cartoons, Barb humming, the washing machine starting a cycle with clothes that were not mine. When I finally went back inside, the kitchen smelled like ham and toasted bread. And Whitney's perfume had settled into the hallway like a second coat of paint. Whitney was in the guest room with Addison, directing the arrangement of stuffed animals along the headboard. Phil was in the living room with a college football pre-game show running. The volume turned up loud enough that I could hear the commentators' names through the wall. Barb was at the kitchen counter, slicing tomatoes with my good knife, the one I'd bought at a restaurant supply store in spring 3 years ago, because the cheap ones from Target kept going dull. And on the counter, next to the cutting board, Barb's phone lay face up. The screen was lit. A notification sat at the top. A green text bubble with the words, "Family Planning" above it, and a preview of the latest message. I picked it up. Barb was in the bathroom. I could hear the water running through the wall. The phone was unlocked, the way Barb always left it, because Barb had never had a reason to lock anything in her life. The group chat was called Family Planning. 4 members. Phil, Barb, Whitney, Todd. I was not in it. I scrolled through 3 months of messages, and my thumb moved slowly, with each swipe revealing another layer of what I'd walked into that morning. 3 months ago, Barb had written, "Whitney's situation is getting worse. What about Caitlin's house? She has all that space." Phil responded the same day. "Caitlin won't like it, but she'll come around. She always does." Whitney's reply came 40 minutes later. "Don't ask her. Just show up. If we ask, she'll say no and then we're stuck." Todd had written, "What if she calls a lawyer?" And Whitney, the message that made my hand stop moving on the screen, "She won't. She's too scared of being called selfish. Just let Mum and Dad handle it and we'll be moved in by Sunday." I kept scrolling. 2 months ago, Todd again. "I talked to a lawyer about the house. He said, since Phil co-signed, we might have a claim." Phil's response, "Good. Keep that in your back pocket." Whitney, "See? We might even have a legal." Right. But there was more. A week after Todd's message about the lawyer, he'd written again, this time only to Phil, in a separate thread that Barb had been copied on. "Attorney says there's no cosigner on the deed or the mortgage. He checked the county records. The claim won't hold up." Phil had not responded to that message. Whitney had never been told. The legal bluff she'd thrown at me in the kitchen an hour ago, the line about Todd talking to a lawyer, was built on information Todd had already learned, was false, and had chosen not to correct. I screenshotted every message. My hands were steady, and my face was still. I forwarded the screenshots to my own email, then backed them up to cloud storage from my phone. Then I set Barb's phone back on the counter, in the exact position I'd found it, next to the cutting board. Screen up, notification still glowing. Barb came out of the bathroom drying her hands on a dish towel from my drawer, making ham and Swiss. "Honey. Want one?" "I'm fine, thank you." I walked down the hall to the second bedroom, the smaller one, the one Whitney hadn't claimed because it faced the street and got afternoon sun. This was the room where I'd slept on an air mattress during my first year, because every spare dollar went to the mortgage, and the walls still had the nail holes from the shelf I'd put up to hold the alarm clock so I could see it from the floor. I tried one more time. I went back to the living room. Whitney was sitting on the couch now, legs tucked under her, scrolling her phone as if she were in her own living room on a Sunday afternoon. Phil was still in the recliner. Barb was wiping down the counter with a sponge she'd found under my sink. "Whitney, I need you to listen to me. This house is mine. I paid for it alone. Every dollar. For 14 years. I need you and the kids to find somewhere else to stay." Whitney looked up from her phone. "Where, Caitlin? A shelter? You want your niece sleeping in a shelter, just until you get on your feet," Barb said. The same phrase she'd used earlier. The phrase that meant nothing because it had no end date and no definition. "How long is that?" I asked. "I don't know," Whitney said. "A few months? A few months turns into a year. I've seen it." Phil stood up from the recliner. "You're being dramatic. Nobody is taking your house. You're in my house right now without being invited." He took a step toward me, and his voice dropped into the register he used when he expected a conversation to end. "I helped you get this house. That's a lie, Dad. And you know it." The room went quiet. The football pregame kept playing in the background, a commentator's voice filling the silence with something about a quarterback's throwing arm, and nobody in the room moved. Phil's jaw tightened. Barb set the sponge down on the counter. Whitney's eyes went from me to Phil and back to me. Whitney recovered first. She straightened on the couch and her voice came out bright and thin. "Todd talked to a lawyer. We might have a legal right to be here." I held her gaze. The group chat was still on my phone, the screenshots already in my cloud, and I could see the exact message where Todd had told Phil the lawyer found nothing. The message Whitney had never seen. She was bluffing with a hand her own husband had already folded. And she had no idea. I said nothing. I turned and walked back to the porch. Behind me, Whitney's voice carried through the screen door. "See? She's fine. She just needs time to adjust." I called Lena again. This time I told her about the group chat, the 3 months of planning, the failed legal consultation, the message Todd had never shared with Whitney. Lena's response was immediate. They planned this for 3 months. The husband consulted a lawyer, who told him there was no claim, and they came anyway. Her voice was measured, the way it sounded when she was laying out facts before a conclusion. "Caitlin, this is not a family emergency. This is an operation. If I call the police while the kids are in the house, Addison is 8. Bryce is 5. They're watching cartoons. The children are Whitney's responsibility. You are not removing children from a home. You are removing adults who entered your property without permission and refused to leave after being asked. The children go where their mother goes, and their mother chose to bring them into a situation she created. Can you come over? I'll be there in 45 minutes. But I want to be clear about one thing, Caitlin. I am not going to make the call for you. I can stand next to you, and I can be a witness, and I can hand you the statute if you need to read it out loud. But the decision is yours." I hung up and sat on the porch step. The Harris County Sheriff non-emergency number was already on my screen. The digits Lena had given me during our first call. I stared at them until the screen went dark. And then I stared at the black glass, reflecting my own face back at me. Inside, through the screen door, I could hear Addison singing something from a show I didn't recognize. She was arranging her stuffed animals on the guest room bed, building a little kingdom out of plush fabric and borrowed pillows, and she had no idea that the floor underneath her was paid for by a woman who once chose a mortgage payment over a real bed and spent her first year sleeping on the floor of the room next door. I couldn't make the call. The number sat on my phone, and my thumb sat an inch above the screen, and the distance between them was 14 years of being the daughter who never caused trouble, the sister who always gave in, the woman whose silence was so reliable that her own family had built a 3-month strategy around it. The call started at 1:15. I was sitting in the second bedroom with the door closed, my back against the headboard of the twin bed I'd slept on for my first year in the house, staring at the screenshots on my phone and trying to figure out what to do with 3 months of proof that my family had planned this, like a military operation. The first call came from Aunt Linda in Spring. I picked up because Linda had always been the reasonable one. The aunt who sent birthday cards with $10 bills and asked how my job was going. "Caitlin, honey, I just got off the phone with your mother. Whitney's kids don't have a stable place to sleep. Can't you help out for a few months? You've got all that room." "Aunt Linda, nobody asked me. They showed up this morning with suitcases." "Well, sometimes family has to step in before being asked." "Your mama is worried sick." I hung up and the phone rang again within 40 seconds. Cousin Tara, who I hadn't spoken to since Thanksgiving. "Caitlin, your dad told me he co-signed on your house. If that's true, doesn't the family kind of have a say in who lives there?" Phil's lie had already made its way through the phone tree. He'd called his brother, who'd called Tara, who was now repeating it back to me, as though it were settled law. The co-signer story, the one he'd invented or half remembered or chosen to believe, was spreading through the family like water through a crack in drywall. By dinner time it would be the official version. Phil helped Caitlin buy the house, and now, Caitlin won't help Whitney. I stopped explaining after the third call. Uncle Randall left a voicemail I didn't listen to beyond the first 6 words. "Blood is thicker than water, Caitlin." Barb's friend from church texted something about grace and generosity. A number I didn't recognize left a 14-second message I deleted without playing. The narrative had been set, and I was not in the room when it was written. Caitlin is selfish. Caitlin has space. Caitlin won't share. The 14 years of payments, the 6 years of saving before that, the sleepless nights, and the burst water heater, and the years of eating the same lunch every day because the mortgage came first, none of it existed in the version of the story making its way through the Novak family that Saturday afternoon. I put the phone face down on the mattress. Through the bedroom wall, I could hear Whitney in the kitchen, talking to someone. Probably Todd. Her voice carrying the bright edge of someone winning. I told Todd she'd come around. She always does. She always does. The words landed on the same bruise that Phil's voicemail had been pressing on for 14 years. I was the daughter who came around. The sister who gave in. The woman who absorbed whatever the family needed her to absorb and never sent a bill. Whitney had wagered everything on that pattern holding. And sitting alone in the second bedroom of my own house, surrounded by the sounds of a family making itself comfortable on my furniture and eating food from my refrigerator, I could feel the pattern pulling at me like gravity. By 2:30, the house had fully become someone else's. I could track the transformation by sound alone from behind the closed bedroom door, the washing machine running a load of Whitney's clothes with the detergent she'd brought in one of the monogrammed suitcases. A lavender scent that was not the unscented brand I'd used for years, cartoon music from the living room. The volume turned up louder than I ever played anything in that house. Phil's weight settling into my recliner, the leather creaking in a pattern that was his and not mine. Barb opening and closing cabinet doors in the kitchen, rearranging things, putting the coffee mugs on a different shelf because she decided the one I'd chosen was too high. I walked out of the bedroom and past all of it without stopping, through the kitchen, past Barb, past the counter where her phone still sat with the group chat notifications still pulsing, through the door to the garage. The garage was the one room nobody had claimed. It smelled like motor oil and dried paint, and the bag of fertilizer I'd bought for the front flower bed 3 weeks ago. My tools hung on the pegboard above the workbench, each one in its outline, the way I'd organized them my second year, when I decided that if I was going to teach myself home repair, I was going to do it properly. The lawnmower sat in the corner with grass still on the blades from last Saturday. Everything in this room was mine in a way that went beyond the deed. These were the tools I'd used to turn an $85,000 foreclosure into a $370,000 home. and nobody in my family had ever touched any of them. I sat on the workbench and stared at the concrete floor. The first year in this house, I slept on an air mattress because I could not afford a bed and a mortgage payment in the same month. I chose the mortgage. I ate canned soup for dinner 5 nights a week and packed the same ham sandwich for lunch every day for 6 months. I learned plumbing from YouTube and wiring from a library book that was 15 years out of date. And when the water heater burst at 2 in the morning during my second winter, I mopped the garage floor alone in a t-shirt and underwear, crying, and called nobody. I did not call Phil or Barb or Whitney. I had already learned by then that calling the Novak family when you needed help was like calling a number that rang and never went to voicemail. Phil didn't visit for the first 3 years because Cyprus was 45 minutes from Katie, which he said every time I asked, as though 45 minutes were a journey across state lines rather than a drive shorter than his daily commute to the auto parts store. Whitney came once, early on, stood in the living room with her sunglasses still on her head, and said, "It's cute. Kind of small, though." The house was 3 bedrooms and 1,200 square feet. Whitney's apartment at the time was a 1-bedroom that Phil paid the deposit on. I stood up from the workbench and walked back inside, down the hall, to the hallway closet. The file boxes were where I'd left them that morning, stacked by year. I reached past them to the top shelf and pulled down the shoebox. The duct tape across the lid had yellowed and curled at the edges. The same tape I'd put on years ago when I decided the box belonged to a version of me I didn't need to visit anymore. I peeled it off and opened the lid. The savings passbook was inside. First National Bank of Katy, Texas, printed in blue ink on a cover that had gone soft from years of being held. I opened it to the first page. The first entry was written in a bank teller's handwriting. The kind of careful cursive that nobody uses anymore. August, $47.50. When I was 13, I'd started bussing tables at Rosie's Diner after school, and the first thing I did with my first real paycheck was walk into the bank on Pin Oak Road and open a savings account. The teller gave me a lollipop because she thought I was younger than I was. The last entry before closing day read $4,217. 6 years of bussing and waitressing, of Friday nights carrying plates instead of going to football games, of birthday money deposited instead of spent, of quarters saved in a jar on my dresser until the jar was full, and then carried to the bank in a plastic bag that cut lines into my palms. That was where the down payment came from. Every dollar of it. From a girl who was too young to drive when she made her first deposit, and too young to drink when she signed the closing papers, and too young, according to her father, to know the difference between a good decision and a dump. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. Another cousin. Another voicemail I would not listen to. Through the living room wall, I could hear Bryce's voice. Small and clear, and trusting in the way only a 5-year-old's voice can be. "Is this our house now, Mummy?" And Whitney, "Yes, baby." I closed the passbook and put it in my back pocket. The garage was cooler by 5 o'clock. March in Cyprus breaks its heat in the late afternoon, and the concrete floor had gone from warm to cold under my boots. I'd been sitting on the workbench for more than 2 hours. My phone showed 11 missed calls, all from relatives whose names I recognized and whose voices I did not need to hear because I already knew what they were saying. Outside, Phil's truck engine turned over and idled, and through the kitchen door, I could hear takeout bags rustling as he came back from wherever he'd gone to pick up dinner for a family that was eating it in someone else's house. Through the master bathroom wall, water was running. Whitney was giving the kids a bath, running water through the pipes I'd replaced myself. Year 7. After the hot water line corroded, and I spent an entire Saturday on my back under the house, with a pipe wrench and a headlamp, watching tutorials on my phone propped against a floor joist. I pulled out my phone. I did not open the missed calls or the voicemails or the text from Barb's church friend. I scrolled to saved voicemails and pressed play on the only file that had been in that folder for 14 years. Phil's voice, the same 11 seconds, the dump and the dumbest thing and the don't come crying. I'd heard those 11 seconds once a year, every year, on the anniversary of closing day. It was a ritual I'd built for myself, without understanding what it was. I told myself the voicemail was motivation, fuel, evidence that I had something to prove, that every extra payment and every skipped vacation and every Saturday spent alone with a paint roller was building a case against the man who called my biggest decision a dump. But sitting in the garage while my sister bathed her children in my bathroom, and my father ate takeout at my table, and my mother rearranged my cabinets, and my phone rang with calls from people who had already decided I was the villain, I could feel the shape of the truth I had been carrying for 14 years without looking at it directly. I did not pay off this house to prove them wrong. I paid it off to earn their respect. Every extra payment was a deposit into a bank that did not exist, a savings account at the First National Bank of Please See Me. And the balance after 14 years of deposits was exactly 0. Phil walked into my house this morning without wiping his boots. Whitney took my bedroom. Barb opened my refrigerator like she owned it. The respect was never going to come. The call I'd been waiting for. The one where Phil's voice would break and he would say, "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. I'm proud." That call was never going to arrive. I'd been waiting for a voicemail that didn't exist by replaying one that did. The passbook was in my back pocket. The deed was in the file box in the hallway closet. The mortgage was paid off as of 7:43 that morning, and the only verdict that mattered in the case of Caitlin Novak versus her family was the one I'd already delivered 14 years ago, sitting alone at a title company with smeared ink on the signature line, and nobody beside me to say congratulations. I did not need Phil to tell me I was right. I was right, and the house said it, and the paid mortgage said it, and the 13-year-old girl who opened a savings account with $47.50 said it. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, walked to the kitchen door and opened it. The family was at the table. Takeout containers open, paper plates out. The glasses with the blue rims filled with apple juice. They looked up when I came in, all 4 of them. And whatever they saw on my face made the conversation stop. I picked up my phone and dialed a number that was not Lena's. Harris County Sheriff's Office, non-emergency line. I'd like to report a criminal trespass at my residence. 20 minutes. That was how long it took. I spent those 20 minutes standing in the kitchen doorway while my family ate takeout at my table. Whitney had found paper plates in the cabinet above the stove, the ones I kept for the 4th of July block party. Phil ate with the good fork from my silverware drawer, the one with the weight I liked because the cheap ones from Target felt like toys. Barb poured apple juice into glasses I'd bought at a HomeGoods in Willowbrook 2 Christmases ago. The set of 4 with the blue rims. Addison had her feet tucked under her on the chair. Bryce was eating chicken nuggets with both hands, ketchup on his chin. They looked like a family having dinner. They looked comfortable. They looked like they lived here. My phone sat in my hand with the call log showing a 4-minute conversation with the Harris County Sheriff's non-emergency line. I'd given the dispatcher my address, my name, the number of people in the house, and the nature of the complaint. Criminal trespass. She'd asked if anyone was armed or violent. I said no. She said a deputy would be there within 30 minutes. I texted Lena 2 words. I called. Her reply came in under a minute. On my way. 45 minutes. The doorbell rang at 5:47. I walked to the front door and opened it. A Harris County deputy stood on my porch. He was maybe 40, with a clipboard under one arm and a radio on his belt that crackled once and went quiet. Behind him, the evening light hit his badge and threw a gold line across the welcome mat I'd bought at a clearance sale my first year in the house. Behind the deputy, Lena's silver sedan pulled into the driveway and parked behind Phil's truck. She got out carrying a manila folder and closed her car door without slamming it. From the living room, Whitney's laughter cut off mid-sentence. The sound just stopped, like someone had pressed mute on a remote, and the silence that replaced it filled the hallway all the way to the front door. "Ma'am, Are you the one who called about a trespass? Yes, sir. I'm the property owner. These people entered my home this morning without my permission and have refused to leave after being asked multiple times. Whitney appeared in the hallway. She was still holding a paper plate. Her eyes went from me to the deputy, and the transition on her face happened in stages. The way a traffic light changes. First the eyes lost their shine. Then the smile thinned and pulled flat. Then her shoulders dropped an inch, and the paper plate tilted in her hand until a chicken nugget slid to the edge. She's my sister, Whitney said. The deputy looked at me. Then at Whitney. Ma'am, the property owner has the right to issue a trespass warning under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05. Are you the property owner? He was talking to me again. Yes. I handed him the printout from the Harris County Appraisal District website. 1 page. 1 owner. I'd printed it on my office printer at some point during the afternoon, while nobody was paying attention to what I was doing in the second bedroom. Caitlin Marie Novak. Sole owner. The deputy read the page, nodded once, and handed it back. Phil came around the corner from the kitchen. He'd put down the fork. Officer, I helped her buy this house. Sir, the deed shows 1 owner. Is your name on this deed? Well, no. But we co-signed the loan when she was 19. And without us, she never would have been able to. Sir, the deed is what determines ownership. If your name is not on the deed, the property owner has the legal right to issue a trespass warning. And she has issued one. The deputy's voice was level. He was not unkind. But he was not interested in family history. If you don't vacate the premises, I can place you under arrest for Class B misdemeanor criminal trespass. Whitney dropped the paper plate on the hallway floor. The chicken nugget rolled under the shoe bench. This is a family matter, she said. Her voice had climbed half an octave. You can't just arrest someone's family, ma'am. I understand. This is difficult. But the law is clear. The property owner has asked you to leave, and you are still here. I would strongly recommend you gather your belongings. Whitney turned to me. The performance was gone. Her face was raw and open and furious, and her voice came out in a hiss that was worse than yelling because it meant she was no longer trying to manage how she sounded. You're really doing this? In front of my kids? In front of Addison and Bryce? Your kids have been in my house since 8:30 this morning without an invitation. You planned this for 3 months. That is ridiculous. I pulled out my phone. Opened the screenshots. Read the words exactly as Whitney had typed them. Caitlin will never call the cops on family. She's too scared of being called selfish. Just let Mum and Dad handle it, and we'll be moved in by Sunday. The hallway went silent. The football pregame was still murmuring from the living room television. Somewhere in the guest room, Bryce asked Addison a question about his chicken nuggets, and Addison told him to be quiet. Whitney's mouth opened and opened again, her jaw working around words that wouldn't come. She turned to Barb, whose face had gone the color of the drywall behind her. You were half right, Whitney. My voice was quiet, the way it always got when I was past the point of raising it. I was scared of being called selfish, but I spent 14 years being scared and paying anyway. Phil stepped forward. Caitlin, this isn't the way to handle. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the passbook, opened it to the first page. The paper was soft from years of being held. The ink faded but legible. First National Bank of Katy, Texas, first deposit. August 2006, $47.50. I was 13 years old and I bussed tables at Rosie's Diner after school. I saved for 6 years, $4,217. That is where the down payment came from, Dad. From me, from 6 years of clearing plates and counting quarters. Phil's hand, which had been raised in a gesture that meant stop, lowered to his side. I opened my phone one more time, scrolled to saved voicemails, pressed play and held it up, so the speaker faced the room. Phil's voice filled the hallway, younger and flatter than I'd heard it all day. 14 years of distance compressed into 11 seconds. Buying that dump is the dumbest thing you'll ever do. Don't come crying to us when you can't make the payments. The voicemail ended. The silence that followed was different from every other silence that day. This one had weight. The deputy looked at the floor. Lena stood by the front door with her arms crossed and said nothing. Whitney stared at Phil. Barb pressed both hands over her mouth. Phil heard his own voice hanging in the air of a house he had never helped build. And the color drained from his face the way water drains from a sink. Slowly, and then all at once. That dump, I said, is worth $370,000. I paid off the mortgage this morning. Every payment, every dollar. Alone. I turned to the deputy. I've issued my warning. They have 30 minutes to gather their things. The deputy nodded. I'll be right here if you need me, ma'am. I stepped aside and Whitney walked past me without a word. She went to the master bedroom and started pulling clothes off the hangers, shoving them into suitcases with the same energy she'd used to unpack them that morning, except now her movements were tight and furious, and she was crying in a way she clearly did not want anyone to see. Addison appeared in the hallway, holding the stuffed elephant against her chest. Are we leaving already, Mummy? Whitney did not answer. She zipped a suitcase and rolled it toward the front door, and the wheels hit the hardwood with the same drumstick sound they'd made 9 hours earlier when everything was going according to plan. Todd arrived 12 minutes later. Whitney had called him from the master bedroom while she was packing, and when his sedan pulled up behind the deputy's cruiser, his face went the particular shade of white that meant he already understood exactly what had happened. He did not argue. He did not introduce himself. He walked past the deputy with his eyes down, past Lena, past me, and started loading suitcases into the back of Whitney's SUV. His silence said everything the group chat had already confirmed. He had talked to a lawyer. The lawyer had told him there was no claim, and he had come anyway. Phil and Barb stood on the front lawn. Barb was crying. The tears were quiet and steady, the kind that come from watching a story you've told yourself for decades collapse in public. We are a close family. We take care of each other. Caitlin is our independent one. The story had been true in the same way Phil's co-signer claim had been true, which is to say it had never been true at all. But everyone had repeated it enough times that the shape of it felt real. Phil did not cry. He stood next to his truck with his hands in his pockets and stared at the house. His eyes moved across the porch railing I'd replaced, the windows I'd upgraded, the fence I'd stained, the yard I'd kept for 14 years. He was seeing it, maybe for the first time, as something other than the dump his daughter bought when she was 19 and too young to know better. He opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. His jaw worked the same way it had worked that morning, sorting through what to say and what to leave out. Except this time the sorting took longer, and what came out was different. When did you do the fence? 2 summers ago. It looks good. 3 words. 14 years late. The smallest possible acknowledgement of the smallest possible thing, and it cost him everything he had. It was not an apology. It was not, I was wrong, or I'm proud of you, or any of the sentences I had spent 14 years rehearsing in my head and listening for in his voice. It was a man standing on his daughter's lawn at the end of the worst day of his family's life, admitting that a fence looked good. It was nowhere near enough, and it was more than he had ever given me. Thank you, I said. Whitney's SUV backed out of the driveway first. Todd's sedan followed. Phil and Barb were last. Barb lifted her hand from the passenger window as the truck pulled away. A small, uncertain wave that was half apology and half goodbye, and entirely insufficient. I raised my palm. I held it there until the truck turned the corner and the street was empty, and the only sound was the live oak rustling in the evening wind and the neighbor's sprinkler system clicking on 3 houses down. Lena had offered to stay. I told her I needed to be alone, and she understood in the way that only someone who has stood in her own empty house after everyone left can understand. She squeezed my arm once, got in her car, and drove away. The house was mine again. I walked through every room. The guest room first, where the bedspread was wrinkled in the shape of Addison's stuffed animals. A pattern of small indentations on the fabric, like fossils pressed into stone. The second bedroom, where I'd retreated in my own house like a guest in the room where I'd once slept on the floor because furniture was a luxury the mortgage wouldn't allow. The master bedroom last. Whitney's perfume was still in the air, sweet and floral and fading. And the closet door was open, empty hangers on the rod, my clothes still pushed to one side from where Whitney had made room for hers. I walked to the hallway closet, past the file boxes, to the top shelf. I put the passbook back in the shoebox and closed the lid. I did not tape it shut. There was no reason to seal it anymore. It was not a secret. It was a receipt. In the kitchen, the laptop sat on the table with the screen dimmed. I tapped the trackpad and the mortgage payoff email reappeared. Congratulations, your loan has been paid in full. This morning, those words had felt like a finish line. The final marker of a race I'd been running for 14 years against a voicemail. And a family that called my biggest decision the dumbest thing I'd ever do. Now they felt like something else. The first day of owning a house I did not have to prove to anyone. I picked up my phone. Opened, saved voicemails. There it was. The 11-second file I'd played every year on the anniversary of closing day. My father's voice, captured in the amber of a digital recording. Preserved for 14 years like a pressed flower inside a book about suffering. I pressed delete. The phone asked if I was sure, and I tapped yes, and the screen cleared. The voicemail was gone. Just like that, 14 years of annual ritual collapsed into a single tap. I'd told myself the voicemail kept me going. That hearing Phil's disappointment was what drove me to make the extra payments. To skip the vacations. To spend my 20s staining fences and patching roofs alone on Saturday mornings, while my friends slept in. But sitting in the kitchen of the house that voicemail was supposed to have ruined, I could finally see what I'd been avoiding. The voicemail was never fuel. It was a wound I reopened every year because I had confused the bleeding with proof that I was strong. The washing machine beeped. Whitney's load was done. I would put it in a bag tomorrow morning and drop it on my parents' front porch without ringing the bell. I sat at the kitchen table. My table. In my kitchen. In my house. The evening light came through the window I'd replaced last spring. The same light that had been there this morning when I'd read the payoff email with a cup of coffee I couldn't share with anyone. I picked up my phone and scrolled past Phil's name, past Whitney's, past Barb's. I stopped on a name I hadn't called in months, Jill Ramsey. From the IT team at work, the one who asked me every other Friday if I was free for dinner after the stand-up meeting. And I always said maybe next week, because there was always something to fix on the house. Always a payment to calculate, always a reason to stay home alone, and prove that I could do it all, by myself. I typed, "Hey, want to grab dinner tomorrow? I'm free." I pressed send. The house was quiet, and the mortgage was paid. The suitcases were gone, and the driveway was empty, and the cardinal was back on the fence. Settled on the top rail in the last of the daylight, Caitlin Novak. 33 years old, sitting in the house she bought at 19, with 6 years of tip money and 14 years of silence. And for the first time since the morning she signed the closing papers with a cheap pen that smeared and nobody beside her to take a photo. She was not waiting for anyone to tell her it was worth it. She already knew.